The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the webinar, How to Use Life Cycle Assessment to Strengthen Your Sustainability Program. My name is Shelley Severinghouse and I'm a Senior Consultant here at Long Trail Sustainability. We will be recording the webinar and we'll send out the presentation slides and a link to the recording afterwards. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the GoToWebinar chat bar and we will address them at the end. I will begin today's presentation with a brief summary of the business value for life cycle assessment. Then I will hand it over to Jeff Zeman, the Principal Environmental Engineer at Kohler Co, followed by Robin Tyndall, the Environmental Stewardship Manager at Hypertherm. We will finish up today's webinar with your questions. Here at LTS, we focus on life cycle assessments and sustainable product development. We are the creators of the DataSmart Lifecycle Inventory package, and we have an extensive LCA training program, which includes certificate programs and online and on-site beginner to expert level courses. We are the North American distributors of the CimaPro LCA software, developed by Prey Sustainability, based in the Netherlands. We are part of their global partner network and we work closely with them and with other partners. All products and services have life cycle phases where resources are used and emissions are created. And LCA is modeling these phases from cradle to grave: raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and disposal. During each step along the way, natural resources are used and emissions are released into the air, soil, and water. And LCA adds up the material, water, and energy inputs and waste and emission outputs and determines what that means in terms of environmental impacts. And LCA identifies product stages or processes that contribute significantly to the environmental impacts. These hotspots may be consistent across impact categories, or they may be varied depending on the study. Some of your opportunities may be outside of your four walls. In this graph, which is common in LCA, you will see the impact scaled to 100%, with the environmental impact categories across the X, such as human health, ecosystems, resources, and climate change, which is just a sampling of what we typically see in an LCA. An LCA avoids burden shifting by encompassing the entire life cycle and multiple environmental impact categories. In this graph, the results are linearly scaled by assigning 100% to the highest value in each impact category. So you'll see that product A has more impacts in climate change, in human health, and resources. However, it has fewer impacts in ecosystems. An LCA does not tell you which is the right or best choice. Your results may show trade-offs. And to make sense of it all, you will have to think about the values of your organization, what's important to your company, how can you reduce impacts, where are your opportunities? An LCA helps to identify potential operational efficiencies through reducing energy, material use, water consumption, waste generation, and emissions. It can enhance brand value for competitive differentiation. In addition, it can improve designs, evaluate materials and processes for manufacturing, and delivering a new product at the design stage before production begins. Around 80% of environmental impacts are locked in during ideation and design stages. Through LCA, you can optimize your supply chain and make better procurement decisions by engaging with suppliers on cost and impact reductions and by encouraging innovation among suppliers. You can create external communication and provide your shareholders with information about the environmental impacts of your products and strengthen existing sustainability goals and strategies. and you can develop better policies. LCAs can be conducted at any point during the product development process. The earlier you integrate LCA into your product development, though, the more influence you can have in lowering the environmental impacts. And of course, it's less expensive to do so at this phase. A good design process is iterative in nature, just like LCA. Neither should be a linear process, but should always circle back around to improve design and reduce impacts. I'll now hand it over to Jeff Zeman from Kohler.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeff. I lead the Product Sustainability Engineering Group at Kohler Company, and we use Lifecycle Inventory, LCI, as the core of our program. Some quick background on Kohler: we have 35,000 associates worldwide and about 60 manufacturing locations throughout the world. Our businesses include kitchen and bath, power, which is engine and generator manufacturing, our interiors group, which includes furnishing and decorative products, and hospitality. That's hotels, golf courses, resorts, and spas. So our agenda today for the Kohler portion, first is lifecycle inventory and how we build the credibility of our product sustainability program through it. We'll then move to design for environment, which is the process we use to incorporate eco-design with our processes. That includes ideation tools and LCI application tools. I will discuss how they work together and are merged with the product development process. And finally, we'll talk about one outcome of our LCI modeling and design for environment work, which is product transparency. Why we do this at scale. We'll give some examples of eco-design results and how we differentiate products with it, and how we use EPDs to support Green Building Standard certification, and what other benefits can come to customers through them. Hey, Shelley, can you advance the slide for me? Thank you. It looks like I'll have to ask you for each. So let's talk about how product sustainability can be enhanced through transparency, not transparency as the targeted outcome we're working for. So don't worry, we'll get to transparency in a bit here, but a better explanation of our approach comes from viewing design for environment as a core competency that we're developing in Kohler Associates. Next slide, please. So often the term sustainability is immediately equated with better environmental outcomes. Although this is certainly a part, it's not charity. It's not granola and Birkenstocks. It's our everyday challenge to help Kohler Associates understand its connection to long-term business success. Next slide, please. It's about giving thought to your family, to your friends, the communities we live in and work in, the clean air and the water that should be a right. And it's also about profit. It's about families supporting jobs that provide a paycheck and purpose, and creating value through our work together. One way to put it is sustainability is a more complete lens to view our decisions through. It's not about compromise or trade-offs. We know and we need to teach that we can create better products and services that people want to buy. So this diagram is how we represent the product lifecycle at Kohler with 4 stages. There's our upstream supply chain, owned operations, consumer use, and end of life. So our product sustainability engineering group partners with Kohler operations to obtain primary data and express it as a plant level LCI or life cycle inventory. So in general, we're assigning resource and waste flows to the value added process steps. And this is what we call unit level process modeling. Next slide. So we use our LCI model results to inform better decisions in product and process. Our first life cycle inventory was completed about 7 years ago, and we did this on our stainless steel sink manufacturing process. One item we discovered was that a thick or kind of paint-like coating on the underside of sinks that was used to reduce noise from the faucet water flow hitting the bottom of the pan. It had an unusually large impact in material manufacturing, shipping, and especially the oven drying process within our plant. So although competitors and Kohler both had this as a premium feature, we differentiated ourselves by removing it, explaining to our customers why this was the case, and we now use a low impact pad that's just as effective. It might not look quite as good in the aisle, but the underside of a sink isn't something that you'll usually see unless you're going for some cleaning products in your cabinet underneath anyway. So in this next slide, at Kohler, we call the application of sustainability data and life cycle thinking, we call that design for environment, or DFE. And our group creates tools and deliverables that are merged with the new product development process that enable better outcomes. The key to this is use of our ideation tool, which is called the DFE Innovation Strategy Wheel. We use that at the very beginning of product and process development. And that little multicolored circle up there in the image is a high-level depiction of what this tool looks like. And this is an interpretation of the Ocala eco-design strategy, which was developed about 10 to 15 years ago, and we adapted it to our own use. Next slide. Here are some product examples with innovations that came about through design choices that considered life cycle impacts. So the first is the catalyst shower head, and that uses air induction technology to make the water droplets bigger, make them feel bigger so that performance does not drop off with lower water use. The next image is, we call it the Octabox. That's our complete toilet solution packaging. And that reduces corrugate. It's more ergonomic for carrying the product. It reduces the paper publications in the box by printing many of the instructions on the outside. And it also stands out quite a bit in the aisle and differentiates us from the competition. And that last image is called the N-Cube. That's a portable power source that can be charged from any 120 volt outlet or a solar panel. It has that flexibility to it. So next slide. So sometimes process wastes happen despite our best design choices. And our challenge then is to find value in them and a purpose that aligns with people, planet, and profit. So what you're looking at here is an image from our waste lab. That's a product development space that makes use of those materials and treats them as resources. One of our first projects there has been creating high-end tiles for our Ann Sachs business. That's part of our interiors group. And that utilizes those materials you see here as the inputs. And we have big plans for this as a maker space. It's currently located at our corporate headquarters campus, and we want to inspire new product ideas, again, using our waste materials as inputs for making products. The next slide. So this brings us to transparency, which is what you were promised in this. So we'll go into some detail here. And you know that customers expect more of us, they expect more of you, and those kind of questions can take many forms, like what's the recycled content of our Villager cast iron tub, or what are we doing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how do I know you're telling me the truth? Next slide, please. So we've challenged ourselves to respond in a manner that appreciates the breadth of products we manufacture and look at both environmental and human health perspectives, and also have this backed by credible standards and third-party verification. Next slide. So a lot to look at here, but this is an illustration of our scaled approach to environmental product declaration development. So what we do is we're taking advantage of our existing in-house competency with plant level life cycle inventory models that have been developed. That means that all products manufactured at a certain plant can have their SKU level footprint identified. So you're seeing that in steps 1 through 3 here. In step 4, then, we're converting our life cycle inventory into a life cycle assessment, and we're partnering with a consultant to write the report that's needed for third-party review. That adds quite a bit of value, adding a consultant to the process, because they're able to more efficiently perform this work with a more robust understanding of what a third-party reviewer will need and expect out of the process. So then our multi-plant model is verified, and its range of inputs as well, not at the individual product level as is typically done with an LCA that supports an EPD. So when we have the model verified as well as its range of inputs, that allows us to create what we call an EPD generator and an EPD template that allows us to respond to individual product requests of customers. If we didn't build our process like this, we'd have to guess ahead of time what products our customers are most likely to express an interest in transparency. And this allows us to respond more in real time to what customers actually would like to help support their own projects and efforts. So next slide. So we didn't begin with transparency as the goal when we built our program, but our product sustainability program has evolved to the point now that we can provide a product-specific footprint with potentially hundreds of EPDs for individual SKUs on demand. As an example of what our EPDs look like. Next slide. So that's one half of our transparency program. For product material health transparency, we've chosen to partner with ILFI, the International Living Future Institute, to create declare labels. And we're learning how to do this at scale, much as we have with EPDs. If you're not familiar with the declare label, it helps customers with green building certification points in programs like LEED, the Living Building Challenge, and the Well Building Standard. It answers questions like, what does a product, where does it come from? What is it made out of? How might the materials it's made out of affect my health? And where does it go at the end of its life? And really it's helping answer with credibility many of the transparency questions that we receive on a regular basis. So not just green building support kind of questions, but the kind of questions that maybe matter even a bit more to customers, the human health and well-being aspects of a product. Next slide. So we still have a long ways to go, both in our eco-design process, becoming a normal part of product development. We have a long ways to go in our transparency program development too, and really telling our story. But we feel that we do have a strong foundation, and that's been it's been set, and it raises expectations in ourselves as an organization, and it raises the expectations of our customers of what better should look like. And that's the end of the Kohler portion of this.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We will hand it over to Robin Tyndall now from Hypertherm.
Okay. Unfortunately, it looks like it jumped right to the middle of my presentation. Is that what you're all seeing? So let me get back to the beginning. All right, here we are. So I am from Hypertherm. I am the Environmental Stewardship Manager here at Hypertherm, and we are an industrial cutting solutions company. So I will explain a little bit more about what we do in just a second. But first, the outline for the presentation for about the next 15 minutes. I'll first talk about how we've used LCA to improve our entire value stream, and then I'll look at instances where we've narrowed the scope of our LCA to focus on two different sets of products. One is our power systems and one is our consumables. And then I'll talk about how we've used an internal design for sustainability scorecard in our product design.
Hey, I'm sorry to break in, Robin, but I'm not seeing the presentation on my screen.
Give me 1 second and I will get it right back up here, Robin. All right, I apologize for the delay, but go ahead and start with your outline here while I get this back up and running. We're actually seeing your screen now, Robin. So feel free to go live with full screen there.
Okay. So you're saying you can see my entire screen instead of the right view? Okay.
We are seeing the outline, so you're good to go right here.
Okay. All right, so I should just continue?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I've talked through the outline. That's hopefully what you can all see now. Oh, sorry. I'm still having problems. I mean, if I can scroll through, Shelley, and that's okay, but I'm not.
You know what?
Now it just changed, so maybe now.
Yes.
That's it. Okay, perfect. But it does look like you'll have to advance the slide.
That is fine.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, everyone. So just to go into, on the next slide, a little bit about who Hypertherm is. We are an industrial cutting solutions company. We're based in the U.S. and we have 12 locations, but we ship globally. We are also 100% employee owned, and we have a triple bottom line mission, which is outlined there. And you can see I've highlighted the environmental portion, which is to enrich our communities and the environment. So below that, you'll see some pictures of all the industries that use our equipment. So very different from Kohler. This might not be a piece of equipment you've ever seen before. There on the right, you can see some of our power systems, whether it's a water jet cutting system, a laser cutting system, or a plasma cutting system. We cut materials for industry worldwide. So whether it's buildings, railroads, trains and automotive, heavy equipment, all the way down to some of our smaller equipment used by artists. Next slide, please. So in 2010, we created a set of very stringent environmental goals for 2020. And I'm going to be focusing on the top line of our 8 goals, which are around our products, and in the categories of waste, energy, and carbon. And it turns out that in terms of our overall footprint as a company, looking at our logistics and our business operations as well, that it really is our products where the biggest impacts are coming from. And that's because it takes a lot of energy to cut through 4 inches of steel plate, for example, if you're building an aircraft carrier. So we knew going into the LCAs that we did, that Long Trail Sustainability did for us, that our products were the biggest portion of our impact, and we wanted to know exactly what the details were behind that. Next slide. So we've conducted with LTS about 7 life cycle assessments over the past few years, and that's across all of our product families. So we have light industrial, that's the kind of equipment that an artist might use or an auto body shop, up to our biggest water jet and mechanized plasma cutting systems, which again might be cutting something like marble, concrete, or 6-inch thick steel for the hull of a ship. Next slide, please. So we had a hunch going into our LCAs about what our biggest impacts were going to be from. Our first hunch was that it was from the electricity use, as I just stated, to cut through materials. Our second hunch was that it was going to be the consumable use. You can see some pictures of our consumables there, and it's sort of a razor and razor blade business model where our customers will buy a power system from us, and they might just buy that power system and have it last them 20 years. But over the course of that life, because of their cutting, they're going to be going through those consumables, using them up and replacing them frequently. So we were imagining this vast kind of virtual pile of consumables used by any given end user, and that because they're made of metal, as you can see there, significantly copper and brass, as well as a little bit of plastic, that was going to be definitely near the top of the impact list. Next slide. Well, it turns out we were wrong. The number one impact from our products, cradle to grave, by far, is simply the scrap that is created by our customers once they cut out their parts. You can see the pictures there, and imagine the parts that they've cut out. What's remaining of that steel sheet is often called the skeleton. And that skeleton, even though it is 100% recycled, we're relatively sure that that's true for most of our customers, it is still the biggest impact by far, over 90% of the impacts. Next slide. And that's true across all of the geographies that we modeled, and it's true across all of the impact categories. So it ends up about 90+% of the impacts are from that scrap, and the second place is a distant second place, and that was what our hunch was, the electricity of our products while they're being used. Next slide. So bringing the scope down to just our product improvement process and our design for sustainability around products, I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done to improve the products themselves. So again, energy use is the biggest when you just look at the scope of the product. We had a new product released recently in 2016 called the 45XP, that's on the right, and its predecessor was called the PowerMax 45. And we've developed some internal metrics that as that 45XP was being designed and developed, and before its launch, we were continually checking in on those metrics that we put on a scorecard that engineers were able to use more quickly than redoing an entire LCA. And through those efforts, the XP was designed to cut 17% faster, which is really important to customers, and it also uses 10% less energy while achieving that speed. We also invented our own metric that's around the energy used, the input, or kWh, versus the output, which is the inches squared cut. That's what customers are really seeing in terms of productivity, is the length and thickness that they're able to cut. And this product saw an 11% efficiency improvement, as well as a 26% improvement in the power to weight ratio. So again, looking at the power, which is the output you want, versus the weight, which is that sum total of all the components and resources that are going into it. Next slide. So the depiction of this scorecard is what you're seeing right now, and this is what we've shared externally. So we're really highlighting that overlap between productivity and environmental impact reductions, energy efficiency. A lot of those metrics there came from the LCA, and then some of them were things that we just measured internally that are speaking more to the customer and their experience. But taken as a whole, that's really communicating the product itself and what its impacts are, but it doesn't take into account that biggest impact, the scrap. So that's the question, is what do we do now about reducing that impact from scrap? Next slide. So again, that scrap being the biggest impact was under the assumption that it was already 100% recycled. So we know that we really need to move up this hierarchy towards reuse, reduction, and elimination of that waste altogether. Next slide. Another product that we sell is a software product, and one of the things it does is called nesting. And that basically means, just like when you're making cutout cookies on a piece of dough, that you're trying to optimize the amount of parts that you can fit on any one sheet of steel. And this is great in that it is something that customers want because they want to increase their utilization of the plate and decrease their cost, steel being one of their biggest costs of production. So there's alignment there, but it's not something we're currently marketing as an environmental benefit. So that's room for improvement. Next slide. The next step would take us all the way up the waste hierarchy to elimination of even the idea of waste. And the concept here I like to call the donut and donut hole approach, and that is that maybe donuts used to be a product and donut holes were simply rolled out, recycled per se, into another piece of dough. But now we all know that donut holes are also a thing. They are a product. And so we'd like to move towards our customers' waste not being viewed as waste, but perhaps being viewed as a product in and of itself. Next slide. Again, up at that elimination portion of the waste hierarchy, looking at the source itself. What is it about steel and its energy intensity in terms of its manufacture could be improved such that that impact goes down. So we have not done this yet, but it is our goal to become more involved in research on low carbon steel, different alloys of steel that can provide strength with less mass, and to promote the use of that kind of steel. Next slide. So another example I'm going to walk through quickly here was using LCA during the R&D portion of a new product design. So like Shelley mentioned earlier, we're way back on the left at that graph around ideation and R&D, where it's cheaper and better and faster to look at environmental sustainability improvements. And with this particular product, we were able to meet our functionality and cost targets while still iterating that design around environmental criteria. Next slide. So in this cradle to gate LCA, one of the things we discovered is that the heaviest components that make up that consumable, and the consumable is the new product I'm talking about, the heaviest have the biggest impacts. And so you can see in that picture on the left, our raw material in the past has always been a solid bar of metal. And so when you look at the parts that come from it that are largely hollow parts, you can see that the heavy component coming from a piece of that iron or copper bar stock is very impactful. Next slide. So another thing we learned is that the logistical component of transportation was very significant when we looked at products that were sold in China and Europe. And that is because we air freight them. There is that trade-off of small, expensive parts, and being able to ship them on ocean freight would be a lot less impactful, but it would involve long lead times and very high inventory carrying costs. So we are looking at how to balance that, given that the LCA has told us what a significant impact that is. Next slide. There we go. So another component was simply a nut to attach this set of consumables to the torch, the plasma cutting torch. And one of the questions that the designers were asking is, are we expecting the end user to reuse this nut multiple times? Are we expecting them to throw it away? What if they lose it? And so the first question we asked is the model even sensitive to the use of this nut between 50 and 100 times, say, of reuse? And it turns out, well, that frequency range doesn't really make a difference. So next slide, we asked another question about that nut. We really realized that we therefore had a choice, that we could make it out of a really durable material and educate and communicate that that was to be reused extensively, or we could make it out of a really cheap material and expect it to be considered a throwaway item. As you can see there, we kind of split the difference with the durable material having high impact in 3 categories and low impact in 3 categories, and the inverse being true for the cheaper material. So with no clear winner, we decided to go with the durable material, trying to discourage that throwaway mentality. Next slide. The next question was around that solid bar stock raw material that I was mentioning before. We had the opportunity to look at what is called a forged blank, and you can see in the picture there that it is much closer in shape to those shiny copper parts on the outside of the picture, therefore resulting in less material waste. And what we found from this is that there are some parts where having a forged blank made a difference, and there were some parts where it was not a reduced impact. Next slide. Our next question was a material question. For these several different parts, we compared material A to material B and found that material B had 40 to 70% lower impacts across all categories. So that was a clear winner. Next slide. For this next part, we compared 4 different materials, and as you can see, had mixed results in terms of the cost of the material, how well it functioned in its application, and then the environmental impact. And this one still had a winner. We were able to choose material E. It still had lower impacts by 50% than the high impact material, but it also had good cost and good functionality. Next slide. Now this was another interesting one. Again, 4 materials, and material D is the same one as the previous slide, the previous part. And in the previous part, material D had a relatively high impact compared to the things we were comparing it against, whereas here material D had a low impact. So that was really interesting to us because it was being compared against different things, and there was a different process that it was going through. And in this case, we didn't really come up with a clear winner across these 4 materials for this part, and so we're looking at a 5th choice in all likelihood. Next slide. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a delay when I ask for the slide changes, but all in all, with all of those various what-if questions that I just went through, we were able to end up with a design, and again, it's not final. We're still looking at some of those materials where there wasn't a clear choice, but it looks like we're going to have a 60 to 70% less impactful product across all categories because of asking these questions. And again, we did it so early in the design process, it's ideal for us in terms of having the flexibility to ask those questions in order to keep costs under control. And again, this is with a product that is not even set to be launched kind of within the 3 to 5 year time frame. So way, way ahead of that typical new product launch and pre-design process. Next slide. So my conclusions are that we found LCA to be a very powerful tool, and it's particularly powerful the earlier that we apply it. So our goals in the future are just to use it as early as possible, to expand our use of it with new technology, new processes, obviously our new products, which is what we've been doing, and to even move to working with and partnering with suppliers to use that in that realm as well. And communicating our results is increasingly a challenge for us, whether it's internally across different teams as well as externally to the marketplace. And that is all from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Robin, and thank you again to Jeff. We will open it up for questions now, so feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar chat bar. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, please email us at info@ltsexperts.com. So the first question is for Jeff. Jeff, when creating your EPDs, step 2 includes creating intensity factors. How do you, Kohler, create these factors?
That's a good question. So that is part of that partnership with the operation I talked about before. We'll take advantage of existing plant metering, or we, our group owns a group of meters and data logging equipment that will allow us to create a relationship between resource use and waste in a particular process and the value add activity that occurs. So it's, if you're familiar with emission factors from the air compliance and control world, it's very similar to that process.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. The next question is, what is the difference between a product LCA that is cradle to gate and cradle to grave? So I'm happy to answer this one, and Jeff and Robin can add to it if they would like. So a cradle to gate study is including the raw materials, material processing, and manufacturing. And cradle to grave adds on distribution, use, and disposal. Jeff or Robin, would either of you like to add anything to this question or provide any examples?
Yeah, I guess I can just provide an example. I use that phrase when explaining some of our LCAs, particularly around our power system energy use. So looking at something that we had, what we felt was a lot more control over, which was the design of our products, that's kind of looking at our product from a cradle to gate perspective. And that's something that our engineers could really attack, whereas the scrap, which is revealed as our biggest impact when we look at it cradle to grave, that's something that we feel from a customer relationship experience we can impact, and our responsibility to do so. But in terms of people internally being engaged to make a difference and do the best that they could do to achieve our mission, which is to reduce the environmental impact of everything we do, that was where the cradle to gate perspective was useful.
Great, thank you, Robin.
Right. Yeah, it's a matter, I think Robin is saying this very well, that it's a matter of what your audience, who your audience is and their potential for intervening with the process and helping it be better. So although it's best practice to have your analysis be cradle to gate, or I'm sorry, cradle to grave, you might pick out parts of that to illustrate where a certain player in the product's use or design phase can make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. This next question is for Robin. Curious how Hypertherm is using these tools to demonstrate business value, lacking a system like LEAD or something similar that provides incentive for transparency. There's potential liability reduction, but just curious how this is sold to business leadership.
Yeah, that's a great question, because unlike a consumer product where there might be people, and it sounds like with Kohler they did have examples of people requesting transparency and asking about these, we feel like we're really out ahead of the industry, and we do not have customers coming and asking for this right now. And so making the case internally to business team leaders and engineering leaders, I'd say number one, particularly with the engineers, is working through examples of this and then showing them the innovation value. So it's leading to innovations. You're introducing constraints that can make it harder for engineers, but in terms of trying to work around those and achieving different metrics and goals, they're going to be more innovative. just being out ahead of what we think will be an increased regulatory environment in the future, achieving regulations that might pertain to certain product families of ours, but not all. So achieving them even where they're not legally required, again, we feel like is out ahead. And I think that we're lucky in some cases, or in most cases so far, the metrics that we're looking at that are the top environmental metrics are also things that impact customers' costs. And whether they realize it or not, by reducing costs, which is something they always want to do, they're reducing their environmental impact. And so we're really tailoring that message according to what we see as the values of the customer. Some of the customers that we go out to might be placing the highest value on safety, or quality, or the environment. And there's so much overlap with these things that you can talk about the metrics that we're achieving maybe for environmental reasons in terms of cost, which is something that they might value more.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Jeff, do you have anything that you would like to add? You certainly have some incentives, like some of your customers seeking those lead points, but is there anything else that you would like to contribute on this question?
Well, I think that, you know, apart from transparency for transparency's sake, that sometimes, you know, the lead process can be checking a box, you know, that we've got this information from the manufacturer. If that was our incentive to producing this information, it wouldn't be enough. We need to be able to go through this kind of effort to understand the impacts of our processes and opportunity. We have to be able to get business value from it. This is a in-house competency that we have, and the justification for building that competency has been the efficiency and cost savings that we've been able to achieve through implementing LCI, LCA, and getting business benefits, much like the ones Robin just discussed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. This next is more a comment around how can you achieve quality data to actually make your LCA? So, Jeff, if we can start with you, who's a little bit closer to the data that you are collecting and that you are creating yourself, any comments that you have around that data quality and things that you do to ensure that?
Sure. Well, at the process or at the plant level, you know, most plants will have a good idea of their resource uses and waste at a macro level. And either that'll be tipping fees at the landfill or utility bills. The challenge is then to break that amount down from a macro level to match it with processes inside the plant, you know, figure out the why. And I think quality data comes from setting up good testing scenarios, good material balances. You know, one of the building blocks of every model that we have is the electricity balance, the water balance, the waste balance, and partnering with the plant to do a fair and credible job of assigning those flows to those process steps. You know, the operation may not exactly understand what kind of result you're trying to get to by building all of these, but when you explain it in simple terms or relating one thing to another, they've got the best ideas for doing that in a quality manner that'll stand up over time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Robin, can you address that, but more from the internal perspective of working with your engineers and product designers to obtain data from them?
Yeah, I'd say that it's challenging, and building the data collection process in as early as possible is really critical and something that we can continue to do better. I think that there's even just the metrics that we've developed internally on our scorecard that map up to the LCA. The purpose of those is to really break the data collection that we need to do internally into understandable, useful bites of information that the engineers know and understand and deal with on a daily basis, as opposed to just approaching them right off with saying, you know, we need to convert everything into tons of CO2 equivalent. That's not going to win them over, or it's going to make them feel overwhelmed that they're going to have to do something that's completely out of their scope. So that task of narrowing down and converting those really big LCA impact category metrics down into the things that really are the root cause of those is really critical into getting buy-in and cooperation.
Thank you for that answer, Robin. If there are any other questions that folks have, please submit them now. If we don't get to it now, or if you think of a question after the webinar, feel free again to email it to info@ltsexperts.com. Here is another question. When discovering raw materials have a high impact in the life cycle of a product, how do you approach external suppliers and work with them to incentivize change and make improvements? Jeff, would you like to start with this one?
Ooh, that's a good question, and it's certainly a challenge. I mean, we have many suppliers. I'm sure Robin can speak to this really well too, and not all of them have the same level of maturity to their sustainability program, but it's a very similar process to what we do internally with product and process designers to have them understand the business value of that sustainability lens. So, you know, often when we're building our own models and we need detailed data from our supply chain, we'll start the conversation with, you know, this is a shared impact, and when we're producing, say, an EPD, it'll have Kohler's name on it, but it's both of us working together, and we'll show them how they'd be represented in our model in the absence of input from them, and that helps start the conversation from, okay, you know, we understand what level of information you need, how you're using it, and why it's important to both your business and customer. And we tend to get, and this isn't always the case, but we tend to have a much better productive conversation then. And it's in our advantage to share what's worked in our own sustainability program and how we've grown that with them to potentially have a program that provides the same benefits with our supply chain too. So there's a lot of looking at shared goals, outcomes, and business case in addition to getting that primary data. There has to be both a give and a take.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Robin, do you have any comments in regards to this question?
Yeah, so Hypertherm is a pretty small company, relatively speaking. And one of the important things that we've discovered is that a lot of these conversations with suppliers come down to power in the relationship. And, you know, us being a small purchaser to a supplier that's supplying, who knows, the automotive industry with millions of units and us with a few thousand, we have no power in the relationship. And so my advice is to start with the places where you do have power, or start with the place where you already have a great relationship with a supplier. Definitely when you have local suppliers, that is a great place to start because you can meet face to face and build the relationship. And the places where we've had early success are those local, smaller suppliers who are more dependent on us. They really do care. They really want to do better, even if they don't know how to start. We've had a supplier summit where we had about 15 of our local-ish suppliers come and share best practices. And when we start there, we find that change is easier. And I would say the other surprising thing is, and this is more from a process change standpoint, when you're asking for them to change a process and not an entire product, It might be around inbound packaging. We've had a lot of waste reduction efforts around reducing inbound packaging, that often just asking is more than half the battle, that there's something that we specified years ago that is no longer applicable or no longer wanted, or in fact not wanted, and it becomes an easy win for everyone to eliminate that process or change that product to new specifications.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. All right. So before we sign off, we would like to let you know that we offer free live demos for SimaPro, the world's leading LCA software trusted by industry and academics worldwide, and Share and Collect, a web-based tool that makes it easy for non-LCA experts to participate in sustainable product development. In addition, we offer demos for Report Maker, an add-on to Microsoft Word and Excel for SimaPro that links your SimaPro LCA charts to your reports, and the Easy EPD tool, which is still in beta, which is a web-based tool allowing you to easily generate EPDs, environmental product declarations. So you can email us to schedule that free live demo. Lastly, we offer customized training. So are you struggling with a particular aspect of your LCA, like using parameters in SimaPro, or perhaps you would like some help customizing an impact assessment method or guidance on how to structure your model? We can help. Our one-on-one training is a very cost-effective way to get the knowledge that you need. We also offer online and on-site training. So thank you again to Jeff and Robin, and thank you for your time today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Goodbye.